I'm late to the party on Andromeda's Edge. There are already a ton of reviews, and this thing has gone crazy on BGG. So rather than just regurgitate the same takes possibly, or a general overview of the game, my assumption here is you know what this game is. You've already watched some of the reviews. Maybe you've even played it and loved it or hated it. I have scrubbed through all of the BGG reviews. I've also went through some of the most prominent YouTube reviews on this, and we're basically gonna kind of aggregate what the sentiment is on this game, and I will offer my opinion as well. First and foremost is replay value. 92% of all written responses on BGG actually mention replay value. So it's a really big point on this game. And of those written reviews, 100% of them were positive. This game has a ton going on. And I'm not talking about just the mechanics. It's all of the extra stuff that becomes variable throughout each and every play, and a lot of which you won't even see on each of your plays, which I completely agree. This has a ton of replayability. Regarding replay value in the video reviews, Broken Meeple said the replay value in this is pretty darn good, and that the game has so much in the normal retail box even before you start buying expansions. I would tend to agree with that. Board Game Buzz states that you'll literally could dive into this game so many times and just be a new faction literally every single time. That's true. I have 15 factions. I don't know what came in the expansion or not. Regardless, there's a ton of factions. There's a ton of different ship upgrades. I completely agree that replay value in this game is really great. So there's a bunch of different factions, and they change the game in a couple different ways. Of course, they kind of set you up a little bit differently with different resources and different placement on the production tracks. But most importantly, they give everyone kind of a special power and also a special ship upgrade. With the Makaran Synthborn, you may freely exchange titanium for energy. That might change your strategy a little bit to focus more on titanium, so you have extra flexibility. It also has convergence during battle preparations. If you spend one or more energy to gain additional battle dice, also gain +1 targeting. This obviously is a more offensive faction. With Tolzid Porters, you get pick up and deliver. When you launch to an alliance base, you may spend 1 credit or any 2 resources to advance 1 space on the commerce track. Obviously, we're trying to abuse the commerce track here. This definitely prioritizes where you're actually placing your ships. Also, it has trade routes. When you launch to a module field, you may buy modules of any type. So there's 2 different tiles. Each one allows you to buy 2 different types of modules. This just gives you ultimate flexibility there. That does come in handy if maybe you're trying to avoid a battle or your range isn't what you need it to be to get to the right space. Then we have Darkstar Acolytes here. It has Ghostly Presence at the beginning of your turn. If there are no ships in your launch bay, you may choose 1 unoccupied alliance base and perform its action. You may also recruit leaders from the chosen region, then return to the station normally. This is obviously giving you a little more power before you return your ships back to bases. With the factions, I think some are more game-changing than others. Each one of them will have you focus on a specific area of the game, or it hopes to, so you can exploit it and use it to your advantage. Another point of asymmetry in this game are your upgraded ship types. In this particular example, as you can see, all of these are science vessels. All of them have the innate ability to be able to get up to the nebula. These are the only ships that can actually do so. However, they each have a little bit different spice here. All but the first have 2 range, and all but the last roll 3 dice. However, their ability is where they really get kind of spicy here. In Protomatter, when you launch this to a nebula or a planet that does not contain a moon, you may take 1 moon from the discard pile. Just gets you extra stuff. You'll come to learn to love moons. You can trade them in for the resources immediately or slot them into various spaces on your board to make actions more powerful. So with the Organic Hulled Science Vessel, it has regrowth at the end of your turn. If this ship is in your scrapyard, you may move it to your launch base. So if this thing gets knocked out, it just comes right back to you to use again. And this last, the Wizard SV, is special because it comes with the faction you pick. You see, these first 2 are different and asymmetrical, but everyone gets a general version of the space vessel. However, only one faction gets access to this one. And it has Portal. When you launch this ship to a nebula, you may gain a new ship at no cost. Obviously, if it's your very special faction ship, it's more powerful than anything else. And this case is no different. You do have a trade-off here in that you're only rolling 2 combat dice. We'll get to how important that is in just a second. Foreshadowing. And then there's this big stack of tactics cards. And these tactics cards come in a bunch of different varieties, some of them more frustrating than others, depending on if you're on the other end of it. This was actually just pointed out from a member on the Discord to me today. Perfect shot. Play after you roll dice in battle. This card counts as an additional result for you. It gives you a 6. This is bad. It's bad for you if you're in battle. Like I said, we'll get there. There's various types of these cards that do various things and activate at different times. I think in general, they're well regarded. There's certainly a aspect of randomness with these tactics cards. In the few plays I've had, and in transparency, I've played this game 6 times. I feel like I'm constantly drawing cards that I don't really need nor want, and the diplomacy cards I really want to affect battle aren't really coming up for me, and I'm on the wrong end of them. So I have really good experience in speaking to what it feels like to be on the wrong end of a tactics card, and it sucks. With that said, is it like a game breaker for me? No, I think they're a decent addition. I enjoy like the conflict cards in Dune that give you this element of surprise that you can strategically use over another player. They just don't always feel fair, I guess I would say. So our next category is complexity and rules overhead. This one was a little bit more polarizing. 67% of all written reviews actually mention this. 83% of video reviews mention this. And 58% of the written reviews were leaning negative in this particular area. It's sitting at a 369 complexity on BGG. We're definitely not talking Lacerda and all of these interconnecting systems that make for really crunchy decisions. I think this borderline's kind of on a beer and pretzels Euro because there is combat along with it. I think the rules overhead comes with this marquee mechanic in combat, which we'll get to my take on in a little bit. There's a little bit of complexity and rules overhead there. There's some things to remember about building your engine and building out developments. I think on the surface, there's a lot going on with this game. Thinker Themer says the game is crunchy and definitely the more complex sibling of Dwellings of Eldervale. The Broken Meeple found the game to be a little bit bloated. They said there's rules on top of rules on top of rules, and that even with helpful player aids, you're still going to be checking the rule book on a regular basis. And I guarantee you're going to make rules mistakes for your first couple of games. I think that's probably a fair statement. I don't necessarily know that's a negative. It's just your preference. I just got done reviewing Elder Scrolls. That thing is rules on top of rules on top of rules. I've played tons and tons of hours with that game, and I'm still referencing things in the rule books and even getting them wrong, as you'll probably see in my comments. I think the larger question for me is, does the rules complexity actually lead to the equivalent experience? Meaning, one look at this thing set up out on your table leads you to believe that you are in for a grand experience. And I think some would argue that the game delivers. I don't know if I believe that. We'll wait till the end to get my thoughts on it. Regardless, there is a lot going on. There's a lot going on the table. There's rules about different tiles. There's rules about how to get those tiles out. There's rules around events and triggering. There's rules about scoring. There's rules about upgrading ships. There's rules about battle. There's rules about activating module cards when the ships return and you're activating your engine. Is it bad? No. I think it's perfectly fine. Just know that that's the type of game you're in for. In fact, a lot of the written reviews on BGG are absolutely praising this aspect, meaning it's creating these layers of mechanics that add to great strategic play. Next up is the combat system itself. So 75% of written reviews on BGG mention the combat system. And of course, 100% of the video reviews also mention the same combat system because it's kind of the marquee mechanic in what is otherwise a worker placement, resource management, engine building, track bumping game. However, 42% of the written responses were negative. So this is polarizing as well. Board Game Hangover notes losing one ship in a battle is a huge loss actually. And the strategic implications make it more interesting than a simple worker placement game where you get resources and trading them for those modules and then moving on tracks. I tend to agree here up to an extent with Board Game Hangover. It is the purveyor of interest in this game. It is what I've termed a copy and paste Euro otherwise. Without all of the systems, the ship upgrades, the actual battle system, the raiders that are out on the board, the tactics cards, without all of that, this is a pretty basic Euro. That's not necessarily a negative. I mean, that is the differentiator. In fact, a lot of Euros are basic Euros without one component attached to it. The question is it good? Like Board Game Hangover says, does this strategic implication actually make it more fun? We'll get there. Broken Meeple found the combat to be frustrating element, saying that a bad die roll can screw a combat for you when you're easily going to be the victor, and the tempo hit from losing combat doesn't quite make up for the benefit of the little bonus you get for losing. They go on to say that while losing one ship is not a huge deal, if you go in with a big army and suddenly the big army gets killed, God, it hurts trying to repair it all and get back on your feet when you shouldn't have needed it in the first place. So we already have a contradiction with a couple of reviewers here. Is losing a ship a big deal or is it not a big deal? We'll get to it. And then Board Game Ramblings notes that even when you employ mitigation strategies, let's say I roll 5 dice and I roll a 2, a 4, a 5, and a 5, and you just roll a 6, you win. So combat, I tend to agree with Broken Meeple and Board Game Ramblings. I think there's a lot of really cool stuff built up around combat. All of these raiders have different abilities. They come in and do different things. There's a wide variety. And in fact, in the replayability and asymmetry, I didn't even mention that. That is definitely another valid point, is these raiders do a ton and you can't really avoid them. They're going to come in and attack. Then these spaceship upgrades, they're all exciting to do. Some of them have to do with combat, some not. Then there's the tactics cards and the diplomacy cards and all these different ways that you can alter battle. The game is trying to give you a ton of agency, but it all still comes down to, can your one die roll a 6 while the other person with 4 rolls 5 and below? You could have had brilliant ship placement ready to come in on the battle. You could have a really high targeting number, we'll say 3 or 4. You can have a ton of combat dice that you're rolling. And someone with 1 die and no other alterations whatsoever can roll a 6 and win. That to me is just not fun. I think the game is trying to mitigate, trying to give you agency, but still allows for this one shot that just blows you out of the water. In the real world, where we are fighting each other in space, if I have 5 spaceships, all guns pointing at your one spaceship, how on earth is that one spaceship going to knock all of them out? Now, the way damage is dealt with, it doesn't necessarily knock all of them out, but how could you possibly be declared the winner when you have one? That better be a pretty darn cool spaceship, but the problem is it's not. It could just be anything that's rolling 1 dice. So I think the game attempts to make combat the marquee mechanic that is that has all this infrastructure around it to make it cool, and just fails with that combat system. With that said, I've read reviews in here where people really like that. They really like the idea of going into combat, all odds against you. You just are really great at rolling that 6. You roll that 6 and you ruin the other person's day. That's great. I'm not going to fight you on that. I think it's personal taste. Obviously it is. This thing is rated really high. It's at 8.5 on BGG right now. So even though this is the marquee mechanic in my mind that differentiates this from any other Euro, and it falls flat for me, I can understand why you might like it. Now, the other gripe I have is winning and losing combat a big deal. Board Game Hangover does say it sucks to lose a ship. Does it? Sort of. I mean, it goes into a scrapyard and you can't use it to activate your engine. Strategically, it's also removing a jumping off point from you to be able to jump from. So maybe your next move, you really needed to use that and the range from another ship to get to that spot you really needed. It could ruin your day in that regard. Is the reward worth it? You get to bump up on a track, which is nice, but the reward, like on a raider, they're not particularly impressive. I mean, bumping up on tracks, getting some tactics cards, rescuing some leaders, I don't know, getting some resources. It's not huge. If your ship is in the shipyard, you can repair it. If you have an energy engine enough to activate the modules that you really need to activate, you really don't need that ship to activate the module because you can just use energy for it. By the end of the game, at least in my 6 games, I'm overflowing with resources with not a lot left to actually spend it on other than more upgrades and developments if possible. So I personally didn't find it hard to activate that engine. So losing the ship in battle, really it comes down to, did I want to use that ship to build the development and now it's gone? Or did I need to use that ship as a jumping off place with the range of my next ship to actually get to where I need to get to? Other than that, it wasn't a big deal. So considering the rewards aren't completely game changing, and when you lose a battle, you actually get a consolation prize. Yeah, it's just a tactics card out of the gates, which tactics cards, as we've seen, if you get the right one, can be game changing for you, or at least battle changing, or whatever it might be. But you can also slot in a pretty cool moon there and get that instead. So sometimes I'm going into battle going like, I don't care if I lose this whatsoever. I've got plenty of energy to activate my engine when I actually bring my ships back. It wasn't a strategic point that I actually needed. And maybe I need that particular resource right now to go get that next module card. So I guess my point is, there's a lot of stuff related to combat that when I read the rules, I was really excited about. But in actual play, I found it to be a letdown. The marquee component as to why I wanted to get this game just wasn't fun for me. If it's fun for you, that's great. I just didn't think so. Next up is production quality. 58% of written reviews mention production quality. 67% of video reviews mention the same thing. 96% were positive. We have to kind of break this down just a little bit. I got the deluxe upgrade, which I actually regret, but that's what I can speak to. And the trays are pretty cool. I love trays that organize the stuff. I believe all of these components here actually come in the base core box. You just don't get all of these different trays. The minis are great, and that to come in a base box is wonderful. I'm glad that they're not standees. I will say, for this tray, as nice as it is to store, I think it's meant to be actually be used out on the board instead of your player board to actually store your stuff. It just takes up too much room. I mean, I guess if you have a giant table, I'm just not going to duplicate what is my player board to store the stuff. So that's good. The vast majority of what's coming in that base box and continues into the deluxe box are run-of-the-mill tiles and cards. Nothing really to speak of there. I honestly don't remember what the base resources are. The deluxe resources, I think, are the best part of the deluxe box. They're awesome. They're beautiful. There's metal credits there. I can't complain whatsoever. So in terms of the deluxe components, they're great. But then you get into the developments and the raiders. I'll have to say, in the deluxe set, these are pretty incredible. I will also say, I wish I didn't have them. It's just too much. They're too unwieldy. These things are giant. This isn't even the biggest one here. You might like that. And if this is your game, if this is your epic space game that you want to play with your group, sure, that stuff is great. Otherwise, they're standees. If they're standees, I don't know what's so great about the quality of the components. I can just speak to these here, and they're definitely cool. They definitely add to table presence, but they're a pain in the butt to get in and out. The trays are fine. The trays that come in the deluxe box work well, but it's just kind of a pain to kind of set up. And the box is absolutely insanely giant. So is this worth the box size to me? No, it's not. I wish at this point I had the retail version. My biggest gripe with component quality is this player board. First of all, I'm buying what is a pretty expensive deluxe version. I paid the money for the minis that I don't particularly appreciate. I would have wanted this dual layered. And if anyone is saying that the core box has great components and this isn't already kind of warping, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it is the thinnest player board cardstock you could imagine. It doesn't fit at all with the deluxe experience. It's the thing in which I am playing off of all of the time. At very least, do just normal baseline cardboard stock that everyone else does. If you're deluxe, think a little bit about possibly a dual layered version. I know, and I get, and I recognize that this was a solution. I hate it. I don't want this in the middle of it to carry all of my resources. I want it in the midst of this. I just want a dual layer to drop it in there. Whatever, not the hugest deal. I am just surprised if people are talking about component quality other than your ships, essentially, with the base version of this. Deluxe version is absolutely beautiful. And if this is your game, I do recommend it for you. I think it's great. Next up is theme and setting. 42% of reviewers mention this. 67% of video reviewers mention this. And as you could imagine, 50% don't like it. So this is a toss-up. This is another polarizing point on this game. I think a lot of people that have played Dwellings of Eldervale like the fantasy setting, and the space setting is just not for them. I think that goes for basically any game that's created in space. I was just playing SETI, and my wife really detests any sort of space theme whatsoever. It's kind of rolled eyes. She definitely liked the mechanics of the game, but that theme just put her off in the very beginning. I think that goes for this, you know, especially since there's this direct comparison of Dwellings of Eldervale. I like the setting. I think the theme is great, especially when you have this giant thing out on your table with the theme of space, it being this large, grandiose production, especially in deluxe. Makes sense. Broken Meeple says that although there are some abstract elements, the theme does come out pretty well. And the different factions and tracks encourage diverse play styles. Thinker Themer much prefers the Dwellings of Eldervale setting. They note that they personally connect a lot more with Dwellings than they do space or anything space related. So personal preference, I like it. I think it's a positive. You might not like it. And lastly, it's really the comparisons with Dwellings of Eldervale. I haven't played Dwellings of Eldervale. I was excited for this game because I hadn't played Dwellings and I was interested in it, but this was a new version and something that I could possibly review on the channel. But 75% of written reviews do mention this. And as you can imagine, 100% of the video reviews. 71% actually prefer Andromeda's Edge. Many think this is a refinement and an improvement on the original system. They cite streamlined mechanics, enhanced strategic options, and much greater replay value. I don't know if that's true because I haven't played Dwellings. So let's go to the experts. Thinker Themer states, mechanically, they believe this is a stronger game, and that while they love Dwellings, Andromeda's Edge feels like a more interesting experience with more to do. The Dice Tower says that Andromeda's Edge is a better version of Dwellings of Eldervale. They didn't want to get too caught up in comparing them. The Broken Meeple expresses a preference for Dwellings of Eldervale, saying that from a theme point, they personally connect a lot more to Dwelling. Well, we're back to that kind of thematic take. I don't have any take there other than to move on to final thoughts. I think this game promises a lot. I think that there is almost a facade of a grandiose experience. But when I come down to it, it just doesn't deliver for me. And I think it's twofold. It mostly comes down to combat, the marquee mechanic, the thing in which that separates it from basically the vast majority of Euros out there, didn't hit home. All of the pieces are there for me. I just think the combat system in the end dilutes all of the contingencies that you can build into your strategy. And I think the rewards aren't particularly great. And I think losing a battle can actually be good for you in certain circumstances. So it makes it not particularly interesting. But I think the intentions around raiders, ship upgrades, even rolling dice is good, if not great. It just didn't pull it off for me. The other thing I wanted to mention is game pacing. And this was mentioned fairly often in the reviews, and some people feel like the game is too long. This has been a conversation that's happened in the Discord quite a bit. Some people not feeling the same way. About halfway through, and I've only ever played a short game to 50 points. In fact, I have this picture. It's about halfway through to actually getting to that in-game state of 50 points. I'm bored. Now, granted, that back half of points snowballs a little bit. You get there a little bit faster than the first half, so it's not necessarily halfway through the game. I'm just ready to kind of be done. The tricky part is that back half of the game, you start to take longer turns when you bring your ships back and you activate your engine. In general, in an engine building game, and I very much would call this, I don't know, worker placement / engine building as like the two mainstay kind of core mechanics. The engine building is fun, and I always enjoy the engine building. I enjoy engine building in general, and I really enjoyed bringing my ships back and activating everything. Two things here. Other players' turns can take a long time. Relative to any other turn in the game, it's so much longer that it just becomes a slog, especially if you're getting to the point you're like, is this thing over yet? And then somebody has a big recall that takes minutes. I don't know. I'm not going to over dramatize how long it is, but it just feels very long, especially comparing to placing a ship and taking a moon. Even to combat in many instances, activating that engine can take a long time. You're not activating the engine a ton in the game, but that's also the most fun part. So on my turn, I like it. But on someone else's turn, it sucks. I've also found that near the end of the game, the engine is as good as I need it. And one of the main ways I'm spending resources is to increase this engine even more by buying module cards. Granted, you get to go up on these tracks at the same time. I find the excitement of getting a new module card to be less and less exciting as you go, just because I kind of have it going. I have the engine up and running. I'm maxing out on many of my resources. I will say, if you find the right cards, especially point producing cards, or you're starting to get some of these in-game scoring cards, that can be great, especially if it happens to nest with your strategy or how high you are on particular tracks. The last critique I have is what I found, and others on the Discord have not agreed with me, the event scoring to be swingy. When an event triggers, which isn't particularly often, you go and score a particular track. You have some agency over that if you have that space vessel to get up into the nebula and be able to manipulate those cards, which kind of narrows your strategy early on, as you definitely want a space vessel early so you can do this, because there can be a pretty big disparity depending on what track is scored. If you have an even approach, it's not going to be a big deal. But if you're going really heavy in a particular track and it's not getting scored, the differences can be pretty big. I think at the bottom you get like 5 points, and at the top you get 20. Are you going to have a 15-point disparity where someone doesn't touch the track and you're at the top? Probably not. But 5 points in a 50-point in-game trigger, 10% of the points, can be a huge difference. I have found that players can become discouraged pretty early if the wrong tracks, for them at least, are getting scored, and the people that can effectively get up to that nebula and manipulate those cards is likely to win the game. Once again, small sample size, it's just 6 games, so take that for what you will. In the end, I've scratched my head on this game. I'm wondering what I am missing, and I might be missing something. But it's just not a game that's pulling at me enough to continue to explore and put in what are pretty darn long games, at least in my experience, to try to find the fun. And for that reason, it's getting out of the collection. If you saw my end of the year recap, you saw a pretty low tier score there as well. So this shouldn't be a surprise if you've watched some of my other videos. If you've liked it, like many people in my Discord, I'm happy for you. I think that's great. I'm not here to try to change your mind whatsoever. I'm just trying to tell you why I'm not choosing to play it. With that said, I'm really happy you made it this far. Thank you very much for being here. Have yourself a great day.